had the CIA and the FBI come out and tell us that we have ISIS soldiers who are infiltrating the refugee program coming into the United States. Mr. Trump does not want that. He does not want people like what happened in San Bernardino to exploit the visa system coming into this country and killing Americans. Mr. Trump does not want to allow individuals to come into this country and essentially create homegrown terrorism.
Well, so how does this work? So it's no longer focused on Muslims, but then instead it's looking at people coming from countries who train and equip terrorists. Before he said Muslims, and so now he's not going to characterize it as Muslims? Immigrants, and I'm talking about immigrants. You say it's about immigration. I'm talking about immigration. I'm talking about visitors coming to the country.
Well, right, but the initial reports were all Muslims, even extending it to American Muslims, which didn't make any sense. And we can go back to that footage and look. This had nothing to do with American Muslims, or even soldiers for that matter. But Mr. Trump is going to be refining his policy, putting out more specific details, which everyone's been asking for. But there has been no change. He still does not want to allow individuals to come into this country who cannot be vetted.
Individuals or Muslims?
Well, it doesn't matter really where you're coming from, except for the fact of the terrorist nations, which is something that he is adding to this policy to make it more clear that if you are coming from a hostile nation and you cannot be vetted, absolutely you should not come into this country. But individuals are the same. We cannot allow individuals to come into this country that cannot be vetted.
Okay, but you're talking about terrorist countries, and what we've seen is individuals who are from Belgium, who are from France. I mean, those you wouldn't technically...
That's the point.
So you're talking about, so explain who is not allowed in and what countries we're talking about, and also how you're dealing, I mean, in this latest...
An individual that cannot be vetted. As we know, ISIS has exploited passport systems in some of these countries. The individual that came in on the K-1 visa, they didn't even know where she was from initially. If you cannot be vetted, you should not be allowed into this country. And I think that speaks volumes. If we are allowing people into this country where we do not know their intentions, we do not know where they're from, and if they're coming from hostile territories, that is extremely dangerous right now.
How is it not a change if before he was talking about Muslim immigrants, and now you're saying individuals? And the reporting that we have coming from Gloria Borger and Jim Acosta is that he's not talking about Muslims. He's not emphasizing that label.
That is a part of the label. So what I'm saying, again, is the initial ban on Muslims immigrating into the country that cannot be vetted, he still does not want to come into this country. If you can be vetted, it's a different story. Mr. Trump is talking about those that potentially are a threat to this nation. I mean, that is one of the things that the federal government is supposed to be doing, and that is protecting Homeland Security. So what he's going to be doing is putting specifics out there so that everyone is clear that he is not talking about Americans abroad or soldiers or anything like that. This is simply an immigration position, not to mention a national security position, that you should not be allowed to come into this country unless you can be vetted.
So there's no religious part to this. If you're Muslim and you can be vetted, it's not a problem. You can come into the country, is what you're saying.
Well, even in his initial statement, when he said, until our politicians can figure out what's going on, that's exactly what that means. But our politicians have told us we cannot vet these people coming across the border right now, and we're bringing them in by the tens of thousands. There is a problem and a disconnect between the politicians and the people of this country.
So Christians, now, how would that work? I mean, what is the religious aspect here? If they're Christian and they can't necessarily be vetted, then that's a problem too, is what you're saying.
What I'm saying is, if you are coming into this country and you cannot be vetted, then you should not be allowed in until you can be vetted. This is not rocket science. This is a man who wants to protect the homeland, unlike what we see with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton for 15 years have allowed our borders to be wide open, using taxpayers' dollars to bring in refugees and others into this country, creating homegrown terrorism. That has to stop.
What is the vetting process?
That's a great question. I'm so glad we could get there. That is a question for the FBI and the CIA, who have told us that they do not have a vetting process. That is something that, as president, Mr. Trump wants to get with Congress to filter that out, because we do not have one yet.
Oh, okay, can you sort of flesh that out a little bit for me? Because you're talking about You're talking about Donald Trump getting together with Congress. So this isn't actually his vetting process. This is something he wants to work out with entities that he currently believes are failing at vetting.
Donald Trump is not talking about the vetting process. Donald Trump isn't talking about the vetting process. Donald Trump is talking about individuals coming into this country, period. That's it.
Okay, you're talking about whether or not they can be vetted.
Until our politicians can figure out what's going on. The vetting process needs to take place. The FBI and the CIA, we have departments and agencies that are supposed to be doing this, and they're not.
But he said he doesn't trust the vetting process, so what is his proposal to address that process?
We don't have a vetting process, Brianna. We don't have a vetting process.
What,
if you
Donald Trump doesn't have a vetting process?
And the CIA, no, the FBI and the CIA do not have a vetting process.
What is Donald Trump's proposal for a vetting process?
Mr. Trump has already said that he wants to make sure no one comes into this country unless they can be vetted. And the CIA and the FBI and the intelligence agencies need to figure out a process before we allow anyone else to come into this country, creating a second generation of homegrown terrorism.
Okay, I want to talk more about that vetting process. I think there's still some details that we need to work out on that. Katrina, stay with me. We'll talk about it after a break. We're back now with Trump campaign national spokeswoman Katrina Pierson, and this breaking news that Donald Trump is going to drop Muslim from his proposed immigrant ban. So I do want to get into some of the details of this with you, Katrina. This is a ban not on Muslims, but rather, according to our reporting, a ban on immigration coming from countries with known terrorism links, training, and equipping. I'm still unclear what countries this includes.
Well, as mentioned, Mr. Trump is going to release more specifics to answer all of your questions.
So, but he will then describe the countries that he's talking about specifically. Is he going to be providing those details?
Absolutely, he's going to provide those details. And to our discussion earlier, we do not have a vetting process in place. That's according to the CIA and the FBI. So the question begs is, what vetting process is Hillary Clinton talking about, since she wants to bring in tens of thousands of more of these refugees into our middle-income communities, because these refugees are not being resettled in the affluent communities or in the politicians' neighborhoods. And so maybe she needs to tell us what the vetting process is that makes it okay to move these people into the neighborhoods of the United States.
And I do think that's a question certainly for her national spokesperson, but since I have you here, I want to know what the vetting process would be for Donald Trump. You're talking about the CIA and the FBI, institutions that clearly Donald Trump does not agree with how they're vetting right now. You're saying he should get together with Congress. It is controlled by his party at this point in time.
Well, there is.
So what are his ideas about vetting?
There is no disagreement with the intelligence agencies on the vetting process, because the intelligence agencies have said that there isn't a vetting process, and that is the problem. Whereas Hillary Clinton says there is, you have the FBI director and the CIA saying that there isn't. So Mr. Trump wants to stop people from coming into this country that cannot be verified or vetted until we could get a process in place, which would have to come from the intelligence agencies. And I'm sorry, Brianna, I don't get the intelligence briefings every day, because if I did, I would be happy to create a vetting process for you. But unfortunately, all lawmakers right now have not done that, and that's exactly what they're working on.
Well, let me describe to you, actually, there is a vetting process in place, and this is what it is. The vetting
begins for the Syrian refugees.
The vetting begins with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which determines who will count as a refugee, who should be resettled, that's about 1%, and then which countries should take them. This alone can take quite some time, 4 to 10 months. Their names, their biographical information, their fingerprints, they're run through federal terrorism and criminal databases, and then the refugees are interviewed by the Homeland Security Department. Then if they're approved, they undergo a medical screening, a match with sponsor agencies, that's called cultural orientation classes, and one final security clearance. That's a process that can take 1 to 2 years, even longer, and it happens before a refugee ever steps onto American soil. How does Donald Trump want, and this is according to PolitiFact, this vetting process and the concept of it has been vetted itself. How does Donald Trump want to change that? You're saying there's no vetting process. I just read the vetting process. How does he want to change it?
Right, Brianna, look, here's the thing. We're not going to base national security off PolitiFact or even the United Nations. We're going to listen to our intelligence agencies like the CIA and the FBI, who says those are worthless because many of these people don't show up in these systems simply because they are not on anyone's record. There is no way to vet these people right now, and that's the problem. Just because there's some arbitrary system in place at the United Nations, that doesn't mean that the United States has the ability to find out who these people are and why they're coming.
In fairness, Katrina, the process I described involves federal U.S. agencies. It may start at the UN, but there are agencies, several of them in the U.S., including the Homeland Security Department, that is involved.
Absolutely, which is exactly why the CIA and the FBI says these systems do not work. We cannot vet these people. It is entirely impossible to vet these people right now because they're not in any of these systems, and that's the problem.
All right, Katrina Pierson, thank you so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it.